Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Michael Dixon. I'm the Director of Graduate Studies, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the fourth Graduate Student Colloquium. The theme of our colloquium this year is The Urgency of Now, Empowerment Through Education and Social Justice. There's a few people I'd like to thank before we get any further for their efforts in helping to make this happen. Those include Dr. Jessica Garces-Jensen, Director of the Masters of Second Language Acquisition Policy and Culture Program. I'd also like to thank Dr. Belle Cowden, Executive Director of Online Learning, and also Lindsay Gibson, Marketing and Recruiting Director of Graduate Studies. I'd also like to thank, while we're here, President Ronald Rashawn, Provost Mohammed Qayyum, the USI Foundation and Mr. David Bauer, as well as the Rice Library and all of our participants here today, in addition to their faculty mentors and teachers that they've had who've helped them get to this point in their lives. Today, the theme of our colloquium, as I said earlier, is focusing on education and social justice. Earlier in the fall semester, I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Brandy Neal virtually. And we engaged in a series of conversations that followed that meeting, which really focused on some ways that we could use the graduate student colloquium to highlight and to bring into the discourse at the level of graduate studies what some of these terms mean, what and how education can help bring about greater social justice within society. This is something that is at the heart of much of Dr. Neal's work, and something about which she will speak more in a few moments when I turn it over to her. But I just wanted to state in a little bit greater clarity that this discourse that has really engrossed the nation over really the last 11 months or so has been exacerbated by a number of events that probably can be traced back to May 25th, 2020 in some ways, although the conversations predate that by many, many years. But the nature of the conversation today is critically important, more important than it has ever been. And to hear both Dr. Neal and some of our students at the University of Southern Indiana address social justice and address the importance of education in helping to achieve social justice is phenomenal. And I cannot wait to hear what all four of our speakers have to share with us today. Before introducing Dr. Neal, I'd like to also remind everyone to share with their friends and colleagues that vaccinations are occurring on campus today and tomorrow and Friday. It is my hope that next year at this time, we can do this again and that we can do it in person, as this is the second consecutive graduate student colloquium we've held in a virtual format. I'm really looking forward to getting back to the in-person experience, but also welcoming our many online students to participate, many of whom don't live close enough to come to campus and to deliver a paper for this event. So I encourage you to share that information about vaccinations with friends and students and colleagues so that we can move more quickly and more safely to an environment in which we can again be together to have this type of discourse. So I'd like to tell everyone as well, or ask everyone as well, to please remain muted while our speakers this afternoon provide their presentations. And it is my intent that we'll have time for the audience members to ask some questions of our speakers as well. What I'd like to ask for you to do is to pose any questions you might have for our speakers into the chat, and I'll pose those to the speaker once we reach the conclusion of their formal remarks. At this point then, I'd like to introduce Dr. Brandy Neal. Brandy holds a PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and that PhD is in educational policy, organization, and leadership. Her research focuses on African-American women in senior level positions and their leadership practices. She is particularly interested in the opportunities, resources, and practices that are used to create inclusive environments for underrepresented populations. While studying specific sociological factors such as identity and institutional structure, Dr. Neal's work encompasses several components of higher education. She currently works at the University of Southern Indiana as a postdoctoral fellow in student affairs, where she advances organizational practices as they relate to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Neal also received her bachelor's degree from the University of Southern Indiana with a major in psychology, and she is excited to be back on her home campus to continue developing USI and its students. And I'd like to say that we are fortunate as the USI community to have her back, and it is my pleasure to turn it over to her now so that she can share with us her thoughts. Dr. Neal.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Dixon, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to try not to twirl around in my chair as much, but it's a really bad habit that I have while on Zoom. But I'm excited to be here, and so without further ado, I'll just hop right into my keynote, which I have titled The Light of Truth, Finding Your Voice. As I sit and watch with tears streaming down my face, I can't help but to imagine the courage it took Genevieve Hanson to take the stand and recount the horrific and inhumane murder that undoubtedly shook America. The victim, George Floyd. On May 25th, 2020, Genevieve Hanson, a Minneapolis firefighter, took a walk in a local neighborhood. And as she approached 38th and Chicago Avenue, she encountered a woman yelling, "Help, they're trying to kill him." As she approached the scene, she encountered 3 police officers applying their body weight to Mr. Floyd's neck, back, and ribs. Once Hanson realized the events happening before her, she immediately identified herself as well as her credentials. She was forced to clear the area and remain on the sidewalk per officers' commands. Though she was trained to recognize signs of someone losing their life, she involuntarily watched on in horror as those who are called to protect and serve did the exact opposite, restrain and kill. Fast forward less than a year later, Hanson took the stand in the murder trial of George Floyd. As she gave her testimony, she displayed resiliency, compassion, brilliancy, and honesty. Though she was met with scrutinizing and antagonistic behaviors from the defense as well as even the judge on the trial, Hanson found her voice to shed light on the truth. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. How do you use your voice to shed light on the truth when people are faced with injustices every day? And I knew what I wanted to talk about today, and I knew that I wanted to relate it back to the theme of the conference, the urgency of now, empowerment through education and social justice. But I really struggled with how I wanted to start this presentation until the trial actually was showing on air, and I decided to watch it. And Genevieve took the stand, and as soon as she gave her testimony, I knew that I needed to incorporate that part into my talk somehow, because what she did, exactly what she got on that stand and did, is what I want to talk about today, and how you use your voice to help others when they're faced with injustices. Ida B. Wells, educator, journalist, and activist, once said, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them." So how many of you have ever been in a setting where you had to be the voice for others, or you wanted to be the voice for others, but you were too afraid to speak up? Or how many of you have ever experienced acts of injustices where you wish somebody would have spoke up for you? Because at that time you may have been caught off guard, you may have been scared, you may have been angry in those types of situations, but you just wanted someone to stand up for you. It's an uncomfortable feeling in any scenario that I just named. And one of my favorite authors slash motivational speakers, Lovey AJ, always says we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, especially when it comes to speaking truth to right our wrongs. As an undergrad, as a grad student, as a professional, as a nurse, as a member of the USI community, as someone's child, no matter how you identify, there's this fear in us humans where we don't want to be the only one or the first one to do something unless it's revolutionary or it's groundbreaking. We love to be the only one or the first one when it's quick to benefit ourselves before it benefits others. But when those tables turn, we're faced with situations that directly don't benefit us, and they'll benefit the next person. So we become overwhelmingly fearful in these types of situations. There's this overwhelming emotion of fear that comes over us that says, will I be the only one? And if I'm the only one, how am I perceived? So how about we pause for a minute, take a step back and reframe that question. And instead of saying, will I be the only one, ask, if I am the first one, can that inspire others to follow suit? So we are removing ourselves from that equation to put others first. And fear has this concrete power to keep us from doing and saying our purpose. But if we begin to address that fear, we can minimize it until it is no longer a thought. And it's funny that I'm even having this conversation today because when I think back on my journey and how I got to where I am today and the work that I do, I didn't see myself in this role or doing what I do now. Growing up, I always said that I wanted to be a teacher. And then that eventually changed to a child psychiatrist, while I was in high school taking my psychology classes and things of that nature. And then once I was in undergrad here at USI, that played a major role in shaping my foundation. And so I was an undergrad here at USI for 2011 to 2015. And at that time, not a lot of students who looked like me were already on campus. And so when we all came in together, I noticed that between after, I would say my second semester, sophomore year, that not a lot of students that came in with me were still here at the university. And so then I began to wonder, like, why did they drop out? Why are they not graduating? Why are they leaving USI? Is it something that they did? Is it something that the university did? And so that kind of began to change my career trajectory. That, as well as me and biology 141, were not getting along. So I knew that I had to kind of change that route a little bit. And so I thought about a plan B, and that was going to get a PhD. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to get it in, but I knew who I wanted to help and why I wanted to help them. And that really helped shape my foundation. And that allowed me to begin finding my truth and helping who I knew needed the help the most. And so my undergraduate experience here at USI, like I said, really helped shape my foundation. And when I say finding my voice, I don't mean talking out loud because I'm shy or anything like that. I would definitely talk in front of a room. I would tell you about yourself in a heartbeat. When I say finding my truth and finding my truth, I mean using my privilege to advocate for others when they're not in those spaces, or when they are in those spaces and they don't feel comfortable enough or they're scared to speak out for themselves. And so that's what I mean when I say finding my truth. And I remember this one particular example. I was working in housing over the summer, And I knew that some of my colleagues identified with the LGBTQ plus community, but it wasn't public knowledge to everyone. At the time, they felt that USI didn't really provide those spaces or those resources or those personnel to really help them navigate their sexual orientation. So they decided to, hold those feelings within themselves, which is perfectly fine. And I worked for housing over the summer, and I remember that we were preparing for a summer camp to come in the next day. And so it was like all hands on deck. We had the supervisors in the room helping us prepare. And one of the supervisors was talking about how we were just casually talking. They started talking about how one of their residents over the summer, or not the summer, excuse me, but over the semester, identified as lesbians. And so it was time to like clean out the apartments at the end of the summer. And the supervisor goes on to tell us like how their apartment was filthy. And I'm like, this is none of your business. You're not supposed to be sharing this out anyway. Why does this even matter? But the supervisor goes on to say, you know why it was filthy, and basically insinuating that because they are lesbian, that their apartments are all lesbians like live dirty and things of that nature. And so before the supervisor even went any further, I definitely stopped them and asked, why does that even matter to you? Just because their sexual orientation doesn't fit the majority or you don't agree with it doesn't mean you can make these false judgments. And I could tell that like my coworkers were getting uncomfortable about the situation because again, like nobody knew how they identified. And so one even got up to excuse herself from the room. And now looking back on that, you never know like who you have in the room with you. And so it's always important to be aware of your biases that you have against other people. And so the next day, my colleague ended up reaching out to me and thanking me for taking up for her. And I told her, you're welcome, but I would have done that whether you were in the room or not, just because that wasn't even the right time and or space for the supervisor to be talking about those types of things, especially with employees and then especially with students. And so looking back on that example, things definitely could have went south, especially with that whole power piece of the supervisor and the employee. And at the time, luckily, I didn't say anything, I guess you can call it like off the wall. Luckily, I didn't say anything of that nature, but at the time, I wasn't thinking about all that. I didn't see myself as a shero or an advocate because at the time, it was just the right thing to do. And so at the end of the day, I wouldn't change anything from that situation. And that's one particular example that will always stick with me because even till this day, my colleague at the time, who has now become a really good friend, we talk about the situation a lot. And so we were going into our senior year after that summer. And so from there, she actually started a student group that became a resource for students who identify with the LGBTQ community. And then she also, after we graduated, she went on to get her master's, and now she's an assistant director working at a resource center on campus for LGBTQ. And she always tells me how if I wouldn't have stood up for her in that particular setting, then she doesn't know if she would have eventually found the courage to even be able to come out and then still be a resource or an advocate for people who identify in this way. So by me finding my truth and speaking out against my supervisor eventually allowed her to be the same for other students who identify as LGBTQ. And so you kind of just never know how when you speak your truth in certain situations, you never know how they're going to play out, especially in the future. And so I want to pose and create the possibility of turning the light of truth on you if you haven't done so already. So if you can think of a time that something has either angered you, triggered you, made you feel lonely, scared, invisible, or even vulnerable, How did that make you feel at the time? And how does it make you feel now, looking back on it? And then I also want you to think about the outcome of the situation. Did that outcome ultimately impact your life, your health, your social abilities, and how you identify in certain spaces? Now imagine feeling those same things on a daily basis at every avenue you turn. And for some of you, this may already be your reality because of your religion, your race, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, your abilities, your political views. I mean, the list can go on. And so social and economic injustices continue to disproportionately impact vulnerable populations, and the constant reminders of systemic racism embedded in society, coupled with state-sanctioned violence, serves as a daily reminder as we continue to see, whether it's on our TV screens, our smartphones, it continues to serve as a daily reminder as to why speaking truth to right our wrongs are so important. And for me personally, my truth comes in a couple of different forms. So outside of me using my voice vocally, my truth illuminates through my work that I do, as well as my writing. I'm a baker, and sometimes it comes out through that as well. And so for you, your truth can come out in various different forms, including art, whether it's music, poetry, painting, writing, crafting. It's just how you use those things to advocate and or benefit for others. And so it's going to be uncomfortable in the beginning. You're going to begin to question yourself, like, did I just do that? Did I say that? What made me say that? Like, what came over me to make me just say that? Wait, let me pinch myself because I might be dreaming. But in reality, when it's time to put light to truth, instead of being pessimistic, you have to ask yourself, did I mean it? Can I defend it? And did I say it with love? And if you answer yes to all three of those things, then own it unapologetically. We have to speak truth to power by saying, I'm going to do this, whether it makes me uncomfortable or not, because I would want someone else to do it for me if I was in that situation. And when you're able to defend it, defend what you mean and do it with love, then the outcome will be immeasurable. And so the key to moving from silence to truth is about letting go of that fear, the fear of being the only one, and finding the courage to speak up against ignorance and injustices. Change takes preparation, and with that, within that comes finding out who you are and what you stand for. Preparing yourself to change involves educating yourself as well as those around you, especially in those small circle friend groups. That's when you'll really get tested. And so you have to ask yourself, are you willing to do something you've never done before? Are you willing to say something you never said before? And are you willing to say the things that need to be said, but everyone else is scared to say? And because of you, if you do this, because of your truth, a woman may feel more comfortable to speak in a room full of men. Because of your truth, someone can continue to feel safe in an environment where they feel threatened in. Because of your truth, spaces can be created on campus for people who identify as non-Christian to worship around campus. Because of your truth, someone may find the courage to fight another day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Neal. It was a wonderful presentation. And it gave us a lot to think about and a lot to consider as well. I hope that, as we've spoken before, you'll be able to take some questions if we have any from those who are present today. I guess I could start by asking one, and as a way for some others to come in. But you know, you sort of concluded at the end by noting the importance of creating spaces where all people who might feel threatened in certain environments can feel safe. As one who is very familiar to the University of Southern Indiana and its community, as a student here and now as an employee in student affairs, and as also one who recently completed her graduate studies at the University of Illinois, what suggestions might you give us, those of us on the call who are directors of graduate programs or the director of graduate studies as a whole, what can we do to make some of those students in our programs or graduate students at the university as a whole, feel more comfortable? What kind of spaces would you suggest that we could create to allow students to thrive and to be as successful as they have the potential to be?
That's a good question. I am all for asking students what they need and how that will help them, because what I have found for me personally as a student, I don't think I've ever walked into one of my directors or my professor's office and said, I need this space created for me and my friends because of X, Y, and Z. It's always been presented to me as, how can we make your experience better? What things are you going through? Or what would you like to see on campus? So I'm all for definitely first and foremost asking students what they would like to see more of and what types of spaces they would like to be a part of, because at the end of the day, yes, this is their university. Yes, this is where they are. This is where they're getting their education from. But at the same time, we want to make sure that everything that we're providing them as a university allows them to successfully finish their degree here. So I'm definitely all for asking students exactly what is it that we can do as a university, or not even just the university as a whole, or maybe even a department. What can we do to better your experience? And I know that some entities around campus are currently working on sorry, it's hard for me not to pay attention to the chat. And I know that different entities around campus are currently working on some of these things, and I would definitely be happy to talk more about that.
Thank you. I've got one question here for you pertaining to assisting others to move from silence to truth. What are some of the strategies that you suggest to help individuals let go of their fears? In other words, how can we help individuals identify their fears and then let go of that fear and feel safe within that new framework?
Another really good question. I think it was a two-part question. Did I get two? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna go back to look at the chat so I can break the.
Yeah. How would you suggest to help individuals let go of that fear?
Okay. The first thing I would suggest is educating yourself, especially when there's a lot of, I guess, injustices that we see around us every day, and we're not going to be able to, I guess, be an advocate for everyone that we see and or hear. And so a lot of times I feel that it's important if we find something that is close to us, something that we can relate to, and then we begin to educate ourselves on that topic. And once we start educating ourselves on that topic, and then when we're in these spaces where acts of injustices occur, that's when we can use what we've learned from these books, and or some of these books even have different exercises in them. So that's when we can use what we've learned from educating ourselves to actually applying it while we're in these spaces. And it's not something that happens overnight in terms of, oh yeah, I'm just gonna wake up one day and I'm just gonna go save the world. It doesn't work like that. And so I definitely think it starts with educating ourselves and knowing who you are and what you stand for, because some things you just won't stand for, whether you're scared or not. And then the second part of that question.
Yeah, I guess how can we help individuals identify their fear and then letting go of that fear and feel safe within that new framework?
I am definitely a doer, a practical, applied type of person. And so I don't think people necessarily know they have that fear until they're in that situation. And so maybe even, I don't know if some professors are on here, but creating some activities or coursework around different scenarios and actually applying these types of things to your classroom, I think that would definitely get students to start identifying their fears, because they don't know unless they're in those situations. And half the time, given our student population, I don't think that a lot of them maybe even encounter some of these situations that we're talking about today on this call.
Yeah, I've got another one for you. Dr. Arthur, the director of the Master of Science in Occupational Therapy program, thanks you for your presentation and comments that it seems there's a balance in speaking out and doing so with love. Mm-hmm. Can you, for us, unpack that some more? Specifically thinking of your supervisor experience with the summer housing position and the LGBTQ plus example you provided. How can you speak out with love to not ruin the relationship or further confirm the bias?
Well, that's a really good question. Thank you, Dr. Arthur. For me, this actually took a lot of practice, I would say, and a lot of growth, because as I stated in my example before, like that could have went really south in terms of how I even addressed the situation and in terms of how or what I even said to my supervisor. And so it just hold on, let me think about how I want to phrase this. So when I say do you mean it? Can you defend it? And did you say it with love? Those three things in terms of, I guess, speaking out with love and not to ruin the relationship is, I'm kind of like stuck on this question because I feel like I've come a really long way from not doing that to where I am now, but it's hard trying to put it into words. I'm sorry, give me a second.
That's quite all right.
Okay, so yeah, I'll go back to this example. When my supervisor talked about this, right, I didn't necessarily see it as them being biased. Okay, I seen it as them being uneducated and them not knowing who was in the room with them, and whether they knew that the employees, some of the employees in the room were identified as that or not was beside the point. I think it also goes back to saying how does this impact you? Does this benefit you in any way whatsoever? And then from there, if they have a response to that, and that's when you educate them and say, okay, well, first and foremost, that's not how this is supposed to go. So let me break this down for you and tell me why, and let me tell you why this is A, wrong, B, offensive, and C, not, something you do in this type of setting. Although I didn't get into that conversation with my supervisor, I felt that I wasn't even, there were other supervisors in the room at the time. So I felt that it wasn't even my duty to even address the situation with the supervisor. That was something that was supposed to be addressed by the higher ups in the room, but no one else even said anything. And so for me to even do that as an undergrad, as a junior, for somebody who doesn't even really know what I'm talking about, I just know that it's wrong. I don't know if I answered your question at all, but I hope I kind of alluded to something along the lines.
I think we have enough people. I mean, I can unmute individuals if anyone wants to follow up and ask some or respond as that is. Just let me know. But I think it was a great answer to a really great question, and definitely not one for which there's a straightforward answer. As you said, there's a lot of education involved, and it's not just a matter of finding the courage to speak out and to take some action. I mean, sometimes an individual might be willing to do that, but not be even aware that something wrong had just been said or been done, depending on where that person is coming from, what her or his background is, and the context in which something was said. So it's a very complicated topic, but one that is so critically important. Any additional questions? I'd be happy to unmute someone to ask. Do you have any additional advice, Dr. Neal, particularly for the graduate students who would be listening to this, who some of whom are going to be graduating in less than a month, and moving on to the next phase of their careers and lives? How can they leverage what they've learned in their time at USI as a graduate student, and utilize that to their advantage and to the advantage of others in that next phase?
Okay, another great question. I think Dr. Cowden, am I saying it right, wanted to say something before you asked that question. She took herself off mute to ask something, but I will answer that question as well. So my advice to grad students who are on this call and or will be listening in terms of what do you do post USI? How do you use what you've learned at USI to go out into the world and I guess navigate the different spaces you'll be in? I just want to say that you're going to be tested, and you're going to be tested no matter what discipline you're in, what route you decide to go in. And it's just basically being able to take what you learned at USI and applying it to your practical situations. And for me, it took me a long time to kind of, I guess, realize the role that USI played in my my graduate career as well as my professional career, because when I look back on it, I still find examples like every day of how USI played a role in how I conduct myself, what type of work I do, because I was very involved when I was at USI, but I didn't know necessarily how that was going to benefit me in the long run. And so I would just definitely say, make sure that you are not only your coursework that you're paying attention to, but it's the smaller things that they don't really tell you in terms of when you're going to go on the job market or when you're going to give these different presentations and things of that nature, about how prepared you're going to have to be, because what you learn in your coursework is going to be very beneficial, especially in terms of the different papers and things you were. It's really hard because I talk from an educational background standpoint, and I know a lot of people, sometimes the Colloquium gets a lot of occupational therapy students and things of that nature who are definitely going to be like hands-on, practical in their field. So I hope I can answer some questions in that nature.
Okay, Dr. Cowden, are you unmuted now, or can you? I think you're good now.
I am unmuted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
So, Brandy, I was just going to agree with the comment that Dr. Dixon said there, because I think it really all does really stem back to that education. And what I was going to say is that, we have to be really conscious and be very sensitive to those that we're speaking to in all circumstances, especially like you said, when we don't know what individuals' situations are, and we, if there's relationships that we haven't built yet, that we don't know, different factors about different individuals, just that level of sensitivity is really key. Anytime that we speak in a group, and your supervisor at that time had not been perhaps as sensitive as he or she needed to be.
Thank you.
Dr. Neal, one of the conversations you and I had earlier in the year focused on, I guess progress is a way to put it. Are things better today, than they were when I was a graduate student, for example, in terms of this type of dialogue, and on so many levels? I think the answer to that question is yes. That some of the conversations we're having today, weren't part of the discourse 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And that's something about which we should all be optimistic. But on the other hand, as you and I have discussed, we're still so far away from an ideal state. And it is easy sometimes to become overwhelmed and despondent on how much work still needs to be done in order to right wrongs and in order to create a better society that's more inclusive for everyone, where everyone feels safe and everyone can thrive. In those moments where one feels overwhelmed, how do you persevere through that? What keeps you going?
That is also another great question. I feel that what personally keeps me going is I come from a line of educators, and so, but it's not my immediate line. It's like way back in the day, my great-great-grandpa or my great-great-grandma, things of that nature. And so what keeps me going are definitely my ancestors, because I know that what they fought for and what they want, that what they would want me to do and what they would want me to see. So at times when I get discouraged, when I get overwhelmed, when I just get tired of this work, which definitely happens more often than not, because it's a constant fight that I have to go through every day. So just knowing what my ancestors would want, and I don't have any kids at the moment, but I do have about 10 nieces and nephews and lots of little cousins that continue to look up to me. And I know that some of them are currently in college, some of them are currently navigating these spaces. And so they always come to me for advice. They always come to me in terms of, how do I handle this situation? What would you do? Can you help me with this? And so that's definitely what keeps me going. My family, my ancestors, and just knowing that because of me, somebody may feel comfortable in a space where they're not welcome, or because of me, somebody is using their voice to speak out against something that they seen that was wrong. And so I just want to encourage everyone. Yes, you will have those days where you're overwhelmed, where you're tired, where you're just like, okay, I can't do this work anymore. But once you definitely find your purpose and your why, it'll get easier.
Well, I'm sure your ancestors will be proud of what you've achieved so far and what you will, and that the nieces and nephews are lucky to have a present day role model that they do.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Dr. Neal? Well, I can't thank you enough for your willingness to speak to us today, and for the the work you've done on campus this year, and I know that you'll do next year as well. And I guess I just have one final question, and that is I guess somewhat selfish one on my part, but can I and the rest of us here continue to utilize you as a valuable resource in helping us educate others to speak out, to find their voice, and to do some of the things that you have articulated for us here today?
Yes, I would love to continue being that resource. For you all, I will also be here next year, as my postdoc is 2 years, hopefully longer, but we shall see. You can always reach out to me, and I can drop my email in the chat, which I am doing right now, and I would be happy to continue these conversations, to bring you resources if I need to, if I come talk to your classes or anything like that. I would definitely be more than happy to.
Yeah, maybe we can try to arrange something, less formal for students only, or something like that. Just a sort of a roundtable or discussion that we can maybe set up. That would be great. Well, again, on behalf of everybody here, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. It's been enlightening, and I think we've all learned a tremendous amount. So thank you once again.
Thank you. You're welcome.
We've got about 10 minutes until we'll start our next session, which will be our first session with 2 speakers, both of whom are students in the Master of Arts in Second Language Acquisition, Policy, and Culture. So if anybody needs to step off for a few minutes, take a break, by all means do so. And we'll be back here in a couple of minutes to introduce our first speaker. Okay, I have 2 o'clock now, so I'd like to begin the next session of our graduate student colloquium, The Urgency of Now, Empowerment Through Education and Social Justice. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and to remind you, if you had missed our keynote speaker, Dr. Brandy Neal, we've recorded the presentation, and those recorded presentations will be available at a later date on the Graduate Studies website. I'd like to now introduce the first of our 2 speakers in this hour, and she is Erina Tamura. Erina is currently a student in the Master of Second Language Acquisition, Policy, and Culture program, and she is also a teacher at the Southern Indiana Japanese School. Erina holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Special Needs Education from Utsunomiya University in Japan, and her research interests include Japanese students' language anxiety and speaking apprehension. Erina's presentation today is entitled Effective Strategies for Overcoming Oral Language Anxiety of Japanese EFL Learners. Please join me in welcoming Erina. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for introduction. So let me share my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, and hello everyone. My name is Erina, and I am a little bit nervous, but I hope everyone will enjoy my presentation. Today I am going to talk about the research I did, effective strategies for overcoming oral language anxiety of Japanese EFL learners. And what I'm going to talk about today is Introduction, English Education in Japan, Speaking Anxiety, Pedagogical Suggestions for ESL Teachers, Conclusion, and then References. Okay, so firstly, introduction. As society has been globalized, the needs of learning English has been increasing as the world language in order to communicate with others effectively. Therefore, the number of international students coming to the US is also being numerous, and this contribute to rich diversity in American universities, which means both American students and international students will have more opportunities to communicate with each other. Therefore, in such communities, a successful communication is a must. So this indicates the importance of language learning of international students. Since one of the goals of language learning is cultivating the understanding and open-mindedness towards different races, religions, cultures, and traditions, facilitating their language learning contributes to the appreciation of diversity within the campus communities. Therefore, teachers need to support their language learning for a successful future in which everyone will be accepted and understood regardless of their different nationality. However, according to Alaki and Raphael, 2018, Japanese international students in the US report that overcoming anxiety when speaking English is the most challenging. And when they are asked to state their opinion in a class, they freeze. As you can see, this bar graph shows that the most challenging skill for Japanese learners is speaking. And what they want to improve the most is also speaking. And this pie chart illustrates that whether or not they have thought they do not want to speak English because of their poor English proficiency. And over the half of them answered that they have thought like that, or they have thought if anything. So teachers need to consider how to get them prepared for speaking English in American universities. So in this presentation, I'd like to introduce the English education in Japan, Japanese students speaking anxiety, and pedagogical implications, suggestions for teachers in Japan. So firstly, let's look at the English education in Japan. According to the Ministry of Education in Japan, one of the purposes of English teaching is cultivating students' basic English skills so that they will be able to communicate with others in English in the future. However, as this picture illustrates, the English classroom in Japan is mostly form focused, like grammar and vocabulary heavy lessons, in which a teacher gives an instruction and students just listen to it. So students can be very passive. As for the activities they do, they are mostly drill activities. For example, teachers often say, okay, everyone repeat after me, apple, and then students follow apple. It's like that. So it is not communication-based, but rather form-based learning. And that is because students have to be prepared for university entrance exam, and what they need is grammar, vocabulary knowledge, and not reading and listening skills, but not speaking skills. Besides that, in Japanese classrooms, teachers have authority. So if students want to say something in a class, they have to raise their hands first. And then once teachers calls their name, they get the right to speak. This is one of the ways of showing respect to older people in Japan. So the classroom atmosphere, it tends to be very quiet. And this kind of classroom can be seen as teacher-centered. And that is why Japanese students are not used to express their ideas spontaneously in the class. So they feel anxiety when they are asked to do that in a class. So what is anxiety? There are mainly two types of anxiety. The first one is trait anxiety, which is related to a personality characteristic. And this is not temporary anxiety, but the person can be anxious because of their personality. So the degree of anxiety can be stable and depends on the person. On the other hand, state anxiety is a transient emotion. So, and this can be caused by some stressful situations, such as test-taking occasions. And if learners exposed to a higher level of stress in such stressful situation for a long time, this state anxiety can be pretty high. Moreover, if learners have strong level of trait anxiety, this can cause state anxiety very often and under various situations. In a second language learning situation, state anxiety is related more strongly, and later we will see what kind of situation will cause state anxiety. So we've talked about language anxiety, but how can it negatively affect learners' language learning? Let me explain Clausen's affective filter hypothesis. Please take a look at this picture. As you can see, a comprehensible input is your knowledge intake. And here, there is a filter. And this filter narrows your amount of input. According to his hypothesis, this filter includes 3 factors, which is motivation, confidence, and anxiety. And if learners have higher level of motivation and confidence, the affective filter can be lowered, and which contributes to successful language learning. However, if learners have higher level of anxiety, the degree of filter, the affective filter, can be also high, and which result in limited language acquisition. Therefore, language anxiety has a significant impact on their language learning. So when that kind of anxiety happens to Japanese students, here I will introduce 4 example situations from a literature review. The first one is speaking English to native or non-native English speakers. According to the research by Suzuki, 2017, having a preparation time for an oral task before the class effectively reduced their speaking anxiety. However, in outside classroom situations, they cannot be prepared for speaking. So this can cause higher level of speaking anxiety. And secondly, being unable to say something in a class, even when they want to express their opinion in a class. As the research by Paul said, Japanese students can be considered as shy people compared to other students from different countries. But this does not necessarily mean they do not have any ideas in their mind, but rather they have a certain willingness to participate in the class. But their lower proficiency level sometimes disturbs them from doing that. And this can be very frustrating and result in higher speaking anxiety. And next one is working with classmates who are more proficient English speakers. As I said earlier, Japanese students have to take the university entrance exam, and this is like a competition. In order to enter a higher level university, they have to get a higher score than their peers. And that is why they sometimes have competitiveness. And this puts strong pressure on them. And the last one is making a mistake in a class and receiving negative feedback from teachers and their classmates. As Ohata 2005 mentioned, losing face because of a mistake in a class is a common stress trigger for Japanese learners, because in Japanese culture, they try not to stand out both in positive and negative way. And they avoid showing their superiority or inferiority, and rather try to be neutral because they care about evaluation from others. And that is why this can cause a higher level of speaking anxiety. And not only situations, there are so many triggers that cause speaking anxiety. And some of them are excuse me. Okay, so here I'd like to introduce the factors negatively affecting speaking anxiety. Some of them overlap with what I talked about already, so I'd like to introduce some of them. The first one is traditional teaching style in Japan. As I mentioned earlier, Japanese traditional teaching style is teacher-centered. So communication opportunity is often limited, and students mostly do not have chance to talk to each other. On the other hand, in American universities, they have the teaching style is rather student-centered. So students are often required to express their thoughts mutually. Thus, American classrooms can be seen as more communicative, which Japanese students are not used to. So when Japanese students are faced with this gap, they feel overwhelmed and increase their speaking anxiety. The next one is personality. Even if learners are from the same nationality or culture, they have a different personality. So we can't judge them by their nationality or culture. And according to the research by Oya, Manaro, and Greenwood 2004, extroverted Japanese students performed better on oral tasks, and they try to take a risk to challenge themselves compared to introverted students. And as a result, they could improve their speaking ability significantly. On the other hand, introverted students tended to remain anxious for a long time, and this indicated that their language learning process, like input, processing information, and output, was negatively affected by their speaking anxiety. Therefore, different personalities can be the factor that encourages or discourages their speaking development. And next, fear of being ridiculed or laughed and losing face in front of others. It's also related to cultural aspects. As I talked about earlier, in Japan, students are implicitly expected to have a right answer. So when they raise their hand to say the answer, they feel like they kind of have to be sure their answer is correct. Therefore, saying something in a class is like taking a risk. So they often hesitate to answer. So how others look at them is a considerably strong factor for Japanese learners. In order to help Japanese students deal with language anxiety, speaking anxiety, previous studies suggested some pedagogical implications for teachers. And here, I'm going to introduce some of them. So if you have any question about the rest, I'd like to hear that later. The first one is cognitive behavioral therapy or questionnaire survey. In cognitive behavioral therapy, students are allowed to state their negative feeling about their learning or the activities they do. And teachers identify their achievable goals and needs based on their level of anxiety. So teachers talk to each student and find solutions together about how they want to overcome their negative feelings. And it is said that this approach was very effective to reduce their level of anxiety. And next one is improving intimacy. As I talked earlier, the Japanese classroom atmosphere is kind of intimidating because of the teacher authority. So students often hesitate to participate. According to Catron 2009, the level of intimacy can be fostered by allowing students to share their personal experiences or by teachers engaging in conversation with them or showing interest in their lives. In such an intimate environment, students will feel more comfortable with speaking in public. So teachers should try to shorten the psychological distance between them. And next one is moving away from the evaluation paradigm. As I mentioned earlier, Japanese students tend to focus too much on accuracy or test score because of the university entrance exam. So they are often afraid of using wrong grammar or vocabulary in speaking tasks. But teachers should teach them the importance of language learning process, and they also should prepare a comfortable environment in which the activities are enjoyable and any mistakes can be accepted. And this will encourage students to lower their barriers and enjoy speaking more. The last one is facilitating the use of coping strategies. As the previous research showed, providing students with coping strategies is very significantly effective to deal with their speaking anxiety. For example, students who had a preparation time for the class beforehand successfully mitigated their level of speaking anxiety compared to those who did not. So, depending on students' anxiety, finding suitable coping strategies for each student can reduce their speaking anxiety. So finally, conclusion. As I explained, there is a great number of Japanese students in the US who struggle with speaking English and have speaking anxiety. In order for them to survive this globalized society and maintain diversity, supporting their language learning is a must because they are the part of people who carry the future. So they need successful communication ability. And in order to do that, I believe there is a need in a Japanese classroom, which is a shift from teacher-centered to student-centered classroom, or the integration of both of them. Because some of the suggestions I talked about earlier are not applicable in teacher-centered classroom. And besides that, it will enable them to get prepared for different learning styles. I also believe that even though there are many pedagogical suggestions, but teachers need to carefully consider students' expectations before applying them. Because applying just one approach does not fit all. The most important thing is being able to consider students' needs and find a suitable approach for them. And that's all for my presentation. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or comments or experiences related to your second language learning, I'd love to hear that.
Thank you so much, Erina. That was fascinating. I think anyone who's gone through the process of acquiring a second language can relate to some of those factors which cause anxiety in the classroom, and that is often carried outside of the classroom as well, as you stated. And some of the changes you've advocated here are great, and both from the perspective of a student at one time and a teacher now, I think that they are things that are applicable not just to the classroom in Japan where students are learning English, but any classroom really. So Thank you again so much. Are there any questions for Erina? If you want to put those into the chat, or I can unmute you so that you can ask at this time. One of the things that I was curious about, Erina, was the level of anxiety you mentioned in terms of the high stakes examinations, the university entrance examinations that occur in the United States recently. As you're probably aware, many institutions are moving away from some of those standardized examinations for the purpose of entrance. Are there similar conversations occurring in Japan, or are those university entrance examinations very much still a part of the structure?
Well, could you say that? I'm sorry, could you say that question again?
Sure. You referred to the high stakes university entrance examinations and the fact that those are that is one factor which creates anxiety. Are there discussions underway currently in Japan that would entail modifying those examinations or doing away with them entirely for the purpose of admissions and also more productive learning, perhaps?
Okay, give me a second.
Sure, sure.
So, so now, so like in Japan, the university entrance exam is such a like big event for Japanese students, because like depending on like which university they go, like their future can be very different.
Sure.
And right, then they want to, what they want to learn and what they want to do in the future can be affected, like both positively or negatively. And also like in Japan, like they have only like one chance to take the exam, the university entrance exam in the within a year. So like this puts like great pressure on them. But like lately, the educational institution try to change like this like testing system. So students will have like more opportunity to take the test like several times in a year, so that like they can like reduce their amount of anxiety, like test anxiety.
Sure.
But like the English institution are still like trying to do that, but it's not really, what to say.
I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the university entrance examinations, the SAT or ACT in the United States, are certainly things that cause many students anxiety. And, you know, as you said, with respect to Japan, you know, they have some effect in determining the institutions to which one would be accepted. I have a question that comes in from Dr. Jensen, and she asks if you know of any efforts to change pedagogical approaches in EFL classrooms in Japan, and if so, how have those efforts been received?
Oh, I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Sure, certainly. Are you aware of any efforts to change pedagogical approaches in EFL classrooms in Japan? And if so, have those efforts been well received, or how have they been received?
Okay, I get that. So one of the pedagogical implication suggestion like they do in Japan is project work, and which is a like small group work, like small group presentation and anything like that, like group work. And one of the previous studies said that like it should be like carried out in non-threatening environment in which any mistakes can be accepted. And we know Japanese students are not good at speaking, so they need more opportunities to speak the language. And also the teachers, like Japanese teachers, are trying to do like this implication. And also they like depending on the level of anxiety, the teacher changed the number of students in one group, so that the students will feel more comfortable with speaking in front of like friends, their classmates. And also I think this is very beneficial for Japanese students, like both Japanese students and teachers, because students will improve their noticing function, like through communicating with their friends. Like they can find out their like mistakes through communicate with friends, and they can see like how others speak English. So as a result, they can internalize their knowledge more effectively. So things like that.
Erina, I have another question here. Can you give us some examples of the resources that Japanese students use to translate language or learn the language?
The resource, like I would say mostly like Japanese students use like Google Translation to translate, I guess.
Is that typically
Yeah.
effective or not so much?
I feel like Japanese students are not aware of like what tools, what resources to use. So they just use the like most common thing, the Google Translate, I guess.
Erina, another one. What can our graduate programs do to help, for example, international students and any anxiety that they may bring to the classroom?
So what we can do for international students, I feel like the most important thing is like being aware of like improving cultural awareness. Like so Japanese students are not good at speaking because of the culture, and then not knowing that aspect, like cultural aspects, like teachers might expect them to participate more, and this puts strong pressure on them. So I feel like teachers or like other classmates should be aware of the cultural differences, I think.
I think Dr. Neal had a question. I'm gonna unmute her here if that.
Yes, that works.
Okay, good.
Hello. I'm not familiar with the Japanese language by any means, but I would like to ask some of the speaking anxieties or talking anxieties that you talked about. Did you have some of those before and or while you were over here at an American university? If so, how did you overcome some of those anxieties?
Oh, so my case, so it's been for 3 years since I came to the US, and I struggle a lot with speaking English. And I used to be an IEP student at USI, and I was kind of confident about my English because I studied a lot in Japan because of the university entrance exam. So I was good at grammar and vocabulary. But when I entered the classroom the first day, I couldn't speak at all. And my students seemed to be very proficient. I thought they're genius. And then, so I was like, I do not want to go to the school. I don't want to speak in front of everyone. What should I do? But the teachers and my classmates are so nice to me, and they did not laugh at me. So it was kind of really like helpful for me. I feel like I could reduce my like barrier towards speaking English. And also I reached out to my teachers very often. And I think IP teachers are the biggest reason I could reduce my anxiety level. So yes, I really appreciate my IP teachers. They are so kind to me.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Erina. I'm going to move now to our next presentation, and perhaps at the conclusion of the presentations today, we might have an opportunity to come back and ask some questions of our speakers if we have any. But thank you again so much. At this time, I'd like to introduce our second speaker, and she is Esra Nur Oz Cetindere. She comes to us from Turkey, and she is currently a student in the Second Language Acquisition, Policy and Culture program. Esra is also an ESL teacher. Esra will graduate with her master's degree in a month, in May. So congratulations in advance to her. Esra's presentation today is entitled Analyzing and Evaluating the University Entrance Examination by the Turkish Council of Higher Education. Thank you for being here today, Esra, and please join me in welcoming her and her presentation. Thank you. I am going to give you, make you a co-host as well. And you should be good to go now.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Can you see my PowerPoint? Yes? Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Esra Cetindere, and I am a student of Second Language Acquisition Policy and Culture, and I'm graduating in a month, so exciting. Today, I am going to present my paper analyzing and evaluating the university entrance exam of the Turkish Council of Higher Education. I would like to start with giving some background information about the Turkish education system. When students start high school, they receive a general education with core classes such as math, Turkish, science classes, and English. And before they start their second year, they are required to choose a major. So this could be science major, literature, or like me, language major. After that, they start taking classes related to their majors. So for example, science majors take more hours of biology, chemistry, physics, and language majors take more hours of English and then take an additional language. When the students are in their senior year, they start preparing for the university entrance exam. And at the end of their senior year, they take two exams. One is a general knowledge exam that all the seniors take. They all take the same exam. And the second one is an exam for their major. Lastly, the students receive their scores, and then they make a list of 24 universities and majors to which they would like to attend. And after that, they are placed in a school or a major if their scores were sufficient. If not, they can take the exam again next year, or they might choose not to attend university. The exam I'm going to talk about is the one for language majors. This exam is administered by the Turkish Council of Higher Education for high school language majors to determine language placement and proficiency. It is a multiple choice question exam, and it is composed of 80 questions focusing on grammar, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. There are no portions for speaking, listening, and writing in this exam. To evaluate and analyze this exam, I will look at how well this exam measures the test taker's abilities and proficiency in the English language. I will discuss if this exam is effective in placing the students in the right universities and majors. For this, I will look at test reliability, student-related reliability, consequential validity, and washback. For an exam to be reliable and free of measurement errors, the items in the exam need to be evenly difficult. Distractors need to be well designed, and the items need to be well distributed. This exam proves to be reliable, measuring vocabulary, grammar, and reading comprehension, but unfortunately, it does not include portions for listening, speaking, and writing skills. And these skills are essential to be proficient in a language. We can say that this exam is reliable in the parts that it measures, but it does not measure language proficiency as a whole. It just measures some parts of it. There are also many learner-related issues when it comes to assessment. For this, we need to look at student-related reliability. These issues can be related to illness, fatigue, anxiety, or psychological factors. These factors may seem beyond control, but there are ways to minimize them, such as giving students consistent materials, giving them enough time to prepare for the exam, giving them consistent conditions for the exam. When we look at this university entrance exam, student-related reliability, we don't see these. First of all, this exam is always changing. Every couple of years, they change the name, number of questions, distribution of these questions, like how many will be grammar, how many will be vocabulary, and it is not very consistent as an exam. When we look at scoring and acceptance rates of universities, they also change each year. For example, if you scored 400 points in the exam, you may think you can get accepted to University of Istanbul because you look at last year and they accepted students who score between 350 and 400. So you think, I did great, I'll get in. But you might not, because the ranking changes and the universities change their quotas often. So what happens, sometimes students receive their scores and they make a list depending on last year's scores and rankings. So a student thinks, with my score, I can't get into Hacettepe University, so they don't include it in the list. But it may turn out that they can get in, but if it's not on the list, they are not given that chance. So they miss their chance by not including that university in their list. Also, sometimes students make a list thinking, I will definitely get into these universities, but their score may not be enough for that year. Maybe universities change their quotas, maybe their rankings are low, so they end up not getting into any of them. So they have to wait another year to take the exam again. And then there are psychological factors. This is a very high stakes exam, so it determines what and where the students will study for next 4 to 6 years of their lives. And it also eventually determines their career. This causes anxiety in many of the students, and it prevents them from getting better scores and rankings. According to a study by Istanbul Gelişim University, the stress of this exam caused depression and eating disorders in high school seniors who participated in the study. And another study by Middle Eastern Technical University showed this exam had negative psychological effects on the students, and it affected their self-esteem negatively. So we see a lot of student-related issues for this exam. Another principle in language assessment is consequential validity or impact. Consequential validity can be described as the consequences of an exam. When we think about consequential validity, we need to consider the impact it has on society and educational systems, and also on the individual test takers. I have talked about the impact on the individual test takers when I talked about student-related reliability, that it causes anxiety, depression, and eating disorders, but it is not limited to that, unfortunately. This exam also made headlines last year because 2 students committed suicide because of it. This caused a lot of controversy on Twitter, and this is something that happens almost every year. So each year around the time of May and June, it is normal to see headlines like this in Turkey. When it comes to the impact on society and educational systems, we see that many students getting stuck in majors and schools they did not really want. This eventually leads to individuals who are not happy with their careers. According to a marketing study by Marketing Turkey, 85% of the people in the workforce are unhappy. Another study by Great Place to Work placed Turkey in 41st place among 45 countries on the happiness scale. That is really low. And of course, some of these people work in education as well. Poor selection and placement of managers and teachers impact the quality of the education system negatively. In conclusion, this exam does not rank highly in consequential validity. Last principle I will look at today is washback. And as you can see here, washback refers to the impact that a test has on the teaching and learning done in preparation for it. So as I mentioned before, this exam measures grammar, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. Speaking, listening, and writing skills are disregarded. This results in many teachers heavily focusing on grammar and vocabulary because they want their students to succeed in the exam. Same goes for students. They want to get into good universities and they want to study the majors they want. So they focus on vocabulary and grammar and not as much on listening, speaking, and writing. This results in language majors who cannot speak the language or understand it very well or write very well in the target language. So many universities in Turkey hold their own exams with speaking, listening, and writing portions to ensure that the students are proficient. If not, they need to take an extra year to attend the preparatory school. And after that, if they pass, they can continue to their majors in the university. And evidence shows the preparation done for this exam lowers the washback considerably when it comes to communicating in the target language. I want to end my presentation with a few recommendations. This is a multiple choice exam, so it is undoubtedly practical and easy to score. But being proficient in a language also means being able to communicate in the target language, which this exam does not assess. To truly determine the student's proficiency and placement, this exam should include speaking, writing, and listening portions. This would raise washback and test reliability significantly. Second recommendation I have is for Council of Higher Education to give Turkish students same opportunities as they do for international students. International students who would like to study in Turkey can include statements of purpose, letters of recommendation, other achievements and certificates in their application. If the council gives the same opportunity to Turkish students, students would have more opportunity to prove themselves, and they wouldn't just focus on the exam anymore. Universities would have broader selection criteria rather than just looking at the exam. This would cause the anxiety around the exam to decrease and encourage the students to become more well-rounded individuals, focusing on other abilities they have, rather than just memorizing words and grammar rules and taking practice tests. Therefore, this would raise student-related reliability and consequential validity as well. This concludes my presentation. There's, of course, more to say about this exam and more assessment principles to analyze, and further research is definitely necessary. But because of time, I would like to finish here. And I would like to thank everyone for coming and listening. And if you have any questions, comments, please feel free to share them. Thank you.
Thank you, Esra. That was wonderful. It paired very nicely with Erina's presentation as well. Also on the significance of the university entrance exam. I guess I could just start with a question for you, and that pertains to, I guess, admissions criteria. That is something that I discuss regularly with graduate program directors, and what we tend to focus on is how successfully does a test or a personal statement serve as a predictor of student success, because ultimately that is what I think all teachers strive for, is for their students to be successful. Mm-hmm. Has the Turkish Council of Higher Education conducted any kind of test to determine the efficacy of this examination and thus its effectiveness as a predictor of student success?
I don't believe so. So Turkey is a very traditional country. So when it comes to these types of exams, they go with what they know. But many of the surveys done about this situation show that so many students are placed in majors and universities that they're not happy with. So this eventually leads a lot of unhappy individuals in society.
Sure. I've got a couple of questions here. I'll start with the first one, Esra, and that is, could you tell us how often Turkish students go to other countries to pursue their studies in order to avoid taking the test in Turkey itself? And as a related follow-up to that, do Turkish employers frown upon degrees that are earned from outside of Turkey?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Actually, there was a recent survey that found Turkish students do really want to study abroad rather than studying in Turkey. But because they don't have much information about it, they usually can't. They don't know how to apply because in high schools, we don't have advisors that tell us about these things. So many students, if they can, they found out how to apply or they know somebody abroad that can help them. So they apply to universities abroad, but many of them are not aware that they can do that.
The follow-up there too, if you could, do Turkish employers look upon degrees earned abroad evenly as those earned at Turkish universities?
Yes. It kind of depends on what country you earned your degree from. So, for example, if you earned your degree from United States, that is regarded very highly. And same goes for Britain. But if you earned your degree from somewhere from Middle East or Asia, I don't think that is regarded as highly as United States and Britain.
I have another one for you. What factors do you believe prevent the examination from changing in the ways that you have suggested it should?
Okay, so I think what we need is a strong foundation. So for the language exam, as I mentioned, it should include these portions that are really, really important in language proficiency. So if we if the Council of Higher Education can gather some specialists to build a good foundation for this exam, then they wouldn't need to change it as much.
Another one for you. Regarding entrance assessments, which are challenging everywhere, can you speak to how Turkey's exam compares with its geographical neighbors and peers?
So I am not very aware of the university entrance exams in Europe or other countries close to us, but what I can give example of is TOEFL, which I took to study here. I would say that TOEFL is doing a better job at assessing the proficiency of English speakers because it includes portions for speaking. So it scores you accordingly. But Turkey's university entrance exam has grammar and vocabulary and reading comprehension, as I said before. So students can score very highly in these, but then they might not be able to speak or understand. And when they go to universities and they attend lectures with 100% English, or they attend lectures in a university abroad, they might not do so good because they have trouble understanding and participating in the class.
Got a question from Dr. Neal that she'd like to ask.
This is a follow-up question to someone asked about the process for studying elsewhere or is that looked down upon, excuse me. So I just wanted to know, like, what is the process for Turkish students who want to study abroad in the US? Are there certain tests that your country has to administer before you're allowed to go study abroad or anything of that nature?
I believe we have several programs for Turkish students to, go abroad and study. We have a Turkish government scholarship that they give out. For that, I think you need to take 2 exams. One is like GRE, we call it ALES, and the other one is TOEFL. So after they take these exams, if their scores are enough, then they can start the application. But that is completely falls on them to apply to the universities. So they need to, look at the university's criteria to complete that application.
Thank you.
Esra, I've got another one that's come through the chat here. This one's actually quite interesting. And it's not just really for you, but also Erina, if she has something to add. But given the high stakes nature of both the examinations you've described, to what extent is cheating a problem or even expected to occur?
Yeah. Cheating, I did not hear like that much like cheating, because like before you enter the classroom, you are searched, and we have a lot of people observing the exam. So if you try to cheat and you get caught, then you are immediately thrown out. So most of the time, because this is such a high stakes exam, people don't dare to cheat.
It's same in Japan too. Like the examiner will check our face and ID, so we can't have another person to take the test instead of the person. So I don't really see the cheating problem in the high stake exam.
Well, that's good. Esra, who prepares the examination that the Turkish Council administers? Are they experts in the field, and are university professors included within the process?
I think they are employed by the Turkish Council of Higher Education. I don't think they're university professors. There are separate employers, and I believe that these experts, they do not change often. So once they are hired, they stay there for a long time. So it is always the same people who are preparing these exams.
Any additional questions? I'm just going through here to make sure I didn't miss anything. We did have a follow-up on a question I asked Esra regarding how often students study in different countries in order to avoid taking the exam in Turkey. Erina, is the same question, the same question is being posed to you. Does that occur in Japan? Do students study abroad in order to avoid or circumvent the entrance examination about which you spoke?
I think it depends, but I don't really hear like students who want to study abroad because they want to, they do not want to take the university entrance exam. I think it's probably because of the financial problem. Also, they do not have like enough information about studying abroad, so they have to choose to take the university entrance exam. I feel like that. Yes.
Yeah, actually, I want to add on that in Turkey, it is a financial problem too, because universities in Turkey are free. So it is easier to study in Turkey rather than just go to the United States and pay.
Well, I can certainly say that listening to both of your presentations, it brought back some personal anxieties that I had encountered as a high school senior and preparing for and taking SATs and other exams and worrying about where I would be accepted or not, and how performance on one day's exam could affect so many things down the line. It is certainly not the most welcoming and inviting atmosphere in order for a teenager to demonstrate her or his potential and abilities. So this has been a fascinating discussion, and both presentations complemented one another so well and are really, really intriguing. For me, in many ways too, in the light of discussions ongoing within the United States right now. I mean, many of you may remember the recent scandals involving cheating on entrance into highly competitive institutions within the United States. I was thinking the same thing as Dr. Hunt, who asked the question about whether or not cheating occurs, but also the decision that many institutions are taking now to no longer require the type of standardized testing, because in so many ways they privilege or they favor those with the privilege of having had access to better preparation and better schooling, for example. So there is an inherent structural bias in some of these standardized examinations that exist within the United States that have perpetuated a system over many, many decades. And I wonder if that is in some way the case with the entrance examinations, both in Turkey and in Japan. Do they favor a certain privileged class within the respective societies?
Definitely. For example, there are students who have access to private tutors. There are students who can go to private courses to improve their abilities in English and for the general exam as well. But there are also students who just rely on the public education system, and they might not do as well as the other students.
Well, again, thank you both so much. And I'm going to transition here to our final speaker of the afternoon. And again, if maybe we have some time, the three of you can hang around for a little bit and take some additional questions. But at this point, I'd like to transition to a very different topic from another speaker, and that is Mariam Gamdlishvili. She comes to us as a Fulbright foreign scholar from the country of Georgia, and she is also the Edmund S. Muskie Award recipient. She will soon graduate with a Master of Arts in Communications. Before coming to the United States, Mariam started a diplomatic career at the NATO Integration Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Georgia. Her experience includes more than 7 years of working on Georgia's Euro-Atlantic integration, foreign affairs, public diplomacy, global and strategic communications, and disinformation research topics at the Digital Forensics Research Lab of the Atlantic Council, Georgian Center for Strategy and Development, and the Office of the State Minister of Georgia on European and Euro-Atlantic integration. Mariam holds a Master of Arts in European Union Studies and also a Bachelor of Science in International Relations. During her undergraduate studies, she held internships for the United States Embassy in Georgia, the United Nations Development Program, the Ministry of Environment and Agriculture of Georgia, and she spent an exchange semester in Prague, Czech Republic, in the frames of the ASIC program. Miriam's presentation today is entitled United States Presidential Election 2020, Media Coverage, Content Analysis. Please join me in welcoming Mariam. I'm going to unmute you and make you a co-host here.
Mm-hmm.
You should be set.
Okay. Wait a second. Thank you very much, Professor Dixon, for such a great introduction. So I will just, wait a second, I will just adjust my screen. Yes, I think here we go. And I hope that you see my presentation and you can hear me.
It looks good.
Okay, perfect. So let's get started then. Thank you very much once again, Professor Dixon, for such a great introduction. And it is a great honor and pleasure for me to be a part of the Graduate Status Colloquium. And without further ado, let's get started. So again, this is the research paper I've been working on last fall for the political communications class, and the title is pretty self-explanatory. It is about the United States presidential election 2020 and its media coverage, and this is the content analysis of the media coverage. So elections of the 46th president of the United States had a pretty unprecedented nature, and it brought very vivid and unusual campaign. President Trump's recent incumbent term was manifested in turmoil that has led to dividing and higher polarization among the Americans. In addition to it, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemics tested not only governments, but leaderships, election integrity, and societies all over the world. And the question of the collective health, freedom, economy, they became topical. Media, as everyone knows, and I hope that everyone agrees on that, play and always play a crucial role when it comes to the information spread and campaign coverage. However, this particular year, 2020, brought new challenges of the present information environment and deepened its influence and its role. So we witnessed a fight on the truth and false, credible media, fake news, social media and mainstream media, credible politicians, and the ones who lie and actually rely on conspiracies. The journalism on its end currently experiences a trust crisis due to the rise of social media and ongoing debate about the credibility and the media polarization. So first and foremost, the present research aimed at the quantitative content analysis of the media coverage of the campaign period of the leaders of the two major parties in the US politics, Republican and Democrat presidential and vice presidential candidates, Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Joseph Biden, and Kamala Harris. And the paper included the literature review, methodology for the research, results, and the conclusion sections. So, okay. I will not get into very details of my lit review because it was pretty extensive, but just to make a couple of points on the scholarly research, because it has extensively addressed the impacts of the media on the public and its influence on the electoral campaigns, process, politicians, as well as candidates themselves. Communication during the election campaign differs very much from other political communication areas, primarily because the results lend to a very fair and accurate measurements because of the election results. Researchers of the various theoretical traditions and schools can put forward for centuries conflicting interpretations of the efficient communication channels in order to ensure the legitimation of the socio-political order that we are living in. So it is not the coincidence that the fluctuations in the level of popularity in scientific community concepts of the maximum and minimum impact of the mass media on the public consciousness, researchers, they distinguish the long cycles which make it possible to interpret them as one of the manifestations of the kind of sociological trends. Subsequently, media and digital media are autonomous subsystem and transmission belt between citizens and elites in the political process, according to the Schroeder 2018. And media became one of the main mechanisms of reproduction of those existing social political systems. Since the media influence has a cumulative effect, its long-term and multi-channel exposure cause not only the corresponding vector of activity of the electorate, but also it causes the legitimation of the existing political order as a whole. So although my research, the research in general, the scholarly works show and provide an overview of the media effects in particular on the campaign planning and previous elections, covering the single issues of the TV news coverage or certain newspapers, the scholarly work vastly also focuses on the social media and its effect on the traditional media, especially in the context of the 2016 elections. However, it is still important to understand, and that's why my study focused on the quantitative research of the elections 2020 and its media coverage, and aimed to answer the following research question. Yes, I forgot to show you that slide, but it's okay. So my research question in this particular paper was next. What is the primary focus of the media coverage of the 2020 election? And I had to respond on that. In terms of the methods, the Nexus Union search tool was used by me through the USI Rice Labor Library database to search for the news coverage and general data set samples for the period of from the first Democratic National Convention that was held on August 17, 2020 to the election day, November 3rd, 2020. I used the words for the search, such as the surnames of the vice presidential and presidential candidates, Harris, Pence, Trump, and Biden. And all the search was narrowed down to the source in terms of I was looking only at the articles that were published by the Associated Press and its wire. And only these source has been chosen for this particular work. The data set has been narrowed down by the geography of the United States to the United States and industries. So I've been looking at the government and public administration, campaigns and elections, and media and communications. In total, the initial data set included 1,045 articles and that were found through the keywords that I've searched in the Nexus Uni. The resulted data set has been slightly refined by the campaign and elections relevance, removing the articles that mentioned keywords, but were not related to the campaign in particular. So, and in the final data set, I have randomly chosen 100 articles, 10% of the whole initial data set. I have read those articles, they were coded in Excel and by the following categories: image, separately for each candidate, Harris image, Biden image, Pence image, Trump image, campaign, horse race, issues, and campaign attacks and accusations as well. So when it came to the image category, I had the articles that were related to that cover actions, utterances, representations of each candidate throughout the campaign period and how the media portrayed each of them to the public. A separate category for each candidate has been created for this code, as I already mentioned. Campaign category covered the news related to campaign management, fundraising, rallies, campaign meetings, campaign travels, and all other articles that were directly related to the campaigning. Throughout the analysis, a category of the campaign attacks and accusations has been emerged, actually, with the emphasis on the articles that covered those certain candidates' behaviors. The horse race category referred to the articles written in the horse race journalism. So these are the articles that emphasize the poll data and the race without focusing on the issues. An issue category referred to the issues of substantial nature of the campaign that arose throughout the campaign period. So those were COVID-19, crime, economy, law and order, race, climate, energy, etc. I've posed the hypothesis in the beginning of my research, and I thought that the primary focus of the media's coverage in the 2020 election would be the candidate's image, and in particular, it would be the image of the President Trump and vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris, as well as issues coverage. Upon the coding, the quantitative data has been generated. Results. There are pretty lots of results in this study, and the study coding results suggest. Is that me or okay? The study coding results suggested that 27% of the articles presented in the data set covered the issues of the campaign on both sides of the camps. Those articles present a thematical approach towards the candidates' views and campaigns on issues such as COVID-19, crime, race, law and order, and climate, as I already mentioned. The structure of the Associated Press articles provides the reader with a thorough analysis on the issues separated by the paragraphs and suggests the views of the candidates. 24% of the news coverage has been devoted to the campaigning, suggesting the overuse of the campaign activities, rallies, in case of President Trump, for example, and fundraising, because he was doing extensively the in-person rallies throughout the campaign. Campaign coverage has been focusing as well on the fundraising and finances, suggesting articles on the fundraising and money spending in the battleground states in particular. And the articles that were directly devoted to the attacks and accusations have also been coded separately and included 2.5% of the data set. Even though the President Trump was famous for the attacking and providing the misleading claims, it was pretty feasible and interesting to see to what degree media directly covered those, and that's why this subcategory of the topic emerged. It is also important to know that some of the coverage included several types in one. Therefore, additional coding also has been emerged and was made for the fact check, domestic misinformation and disinformation issues. Together, fact-checking articles within the context of the campaigns or issues, as well as misinformation-related and disinformation-related coverage, comprised the 25% of the whole data set. They were suggesting that the fact-checking became a new function, some sort of function for the media campaign coverage in comparison to the 2016 campaign. For example, the thorough fact check has been presented on the misleading information spread about the pandemic. And continuing discussion on the misinformation together with the fact checking and focusing on the President Trump's misinformation and articles have been extensively addressed the issue of the spreaders of such misinformation claims, disinformation claims, and conspiracies such as QAnon, which later after the campaign became even more topical. And several articles covered, for example, the fundraiser event attended by Pence, and it was supported by the QAnon, as well as covering President Trump's attitude towards this group. Furthermore, 11% of the coverage has been devoted extensively and separately to the image of the incumbent President Trump. And while the media was focusing on the issues of campaign in general, primarily Trump, the coverage of the Trump's image was the leading among the other candidates, and his image and his persona, the coverage about his image and his persona were actually leading. Only 6% of the Associated Press coverage focused on the Kamala Harris image, 5% on Mike Pence's, 4% on Joe Biden's. Though the President Trump's image is widely discussed, the coverage of other candidates was relatively positive and also covered some interesting aspects of misinformation. For example, since named to the presidential ticket, Harris has been at the center of the online misinformation campaigns 4 times as much as, and I'm quoting the Associated Press here, 4 times as much as the white man who campaigned for her job in the last 4 years. And consequently, those claims on its end imply the further continuous need for the mainstream media to continue fact-checking. The horse race coverage comprised only 10% of the data set. And interestingly enough, you can see on the graph that through the time, as soon as we were nearing and going closely to the campaign, the horse race journalism has increased and emerged, especially approaching the election day. Again, the additional data was observed throughout this study is related to the mean number of words in the coverage of the individual candidates. And despite the fact that the President Trump's coverage was the highest in terms of his image among the candidates, the mean number of words in articles related to his image comprised only 897 words, while for the Mike Pence it was 904 words. And very interestingly enough, with the less coverage in the percentage, the mean number of words for Joe Biden's coverage is 1,113, and for Kamala Harris it was 1,417. Therefore, this at some point indicates the quality of the information spread due to the less active nature is more substantive in size, even though it was like less covered, but it was more substantive. As mentioned above, a new function that was taken by the Associated Press represented the fact check. And here is an example of all those headlines and fact check function that has been observed from August till October, just as an example. And overall, in each category, themes fluctuated over the time within very intensified nature, with debates and general issues arising around the candidates, suggesting several stories and issues, for example, covered in one day. And you can see the headlines on the slide. So in terms of the conclusion, the thorough analysis of the media content may help to understand the focus and the attention of the media throughout the campaign period, and especially in the campaign period that was just recently in the elections 2020. And the present paper suggests that the media focus in the elections of 2020 was primarily on the issues and overall campaigns of the candidates. Furthermore, it examined the statistical data retrieved from the dataset of the Associated Press media coverage. The research found that the primary focus of the news coverage related to elections was on the categories of issues comprising 27% of the coverage and campaign comprising 24% of the coverage. The partial study did not suggested hypothesis that the primary focus would be on the candidates or certain candidates' image. However, the study supports the claim that the hypothesis that the media coverage focused on the issues in the campaign period. Furthermore, it is important to highlight that the study explained and emphasized the importance of the new functions that media coverage has extensively used, the fact-checking tool and coverage of the misleading claims, supported by the extensive explanations and facts. The internal validity of this study may be influenced by the larger sample of the data set. In terms of the external validity, this study can be generalized to the samples of other sources of the news. And also in terms of the future research, present study may be used as a base of the data set of the Associated Press news coverage and may be tested by other news outlets. Hence, the question of the future research will lay in the evaluation of the focused data sets from the biased media outlets, for example, as well as a comparison of the Associated Press coverage to another objective or subjective outlets that may be observed with regard to the US presidential elections as well. I'm a little bit over time, I guess, but here are my references. And these are my contacts, and I'm eager to go to the discussion and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariam. That was fascinating and quite timely as well. You know, it hasn't been that long since the election concluded, and in some ways, I know that I'm still trying to digest all of it, and that really helped provide some clarity, particularly on the way the media covered the events between the 17th of August and the 3rd of November. It'd be interesting to conduct an analysis similar from, say, the 4th of November through the 20th of January to see, how the media covered these 4 individuals in that, 2.5-month period following the end of the election up through the inauguration, which was really an unprecedented period in U.S. presidential elections, with the possible exception of 2000, but that was of a very, very different nature. But, thank you again. That was really interesting. So I've got one question already in the chat, if I can direct that to you. This is from Dr. Hunt, and she asks, was horse race an actual search term, or is this how you are referring to the statistical items?
No, horse race was not a search. It was one of the topics for the coding. So I've been coding the data by image, campaign, horse race. So if I was seeing the articles that were related to the polls or numbers generally, and that was, of course, in the style of the horse race journalism, that would be the topic to code. It's not the search. No, I didn't use that word to search, but it was the coding item.
Thank you for clarifying that. Do we have any other questions for Mariam? I'm trying myself to process through it all. I know I have dozens of questions, and I'm trying to make sense of it, but
it's about numbers. It's the way quantitative.
Yes.
And it's been a long day.
Do you think, I've got another one here for you, Mariam. Do you think that your research could be used by future presidential campaign strategists? It's a great question.
That's a great question. I actually would love to, because even though maybe it was not a very large research of various sources and various outlets, it was only Associated Press, but it could be a kind of, I don't know, as I mentioned in the end, that it could serve as a template maybe. It could be used by any campaign strategist, I think, because with the quantitative data, you see clearly what media looks at, what they're reporting about. Is it an image or issues? Because I initially thought that the image would be the main and the primary focus of the Associated Press media coverage, but in reality, it turned out that they were focusing on issues. So maybe, why not? That could be beneficial for the strategy in the future.
Have you considered expanding the study outside beyond just the Associated Press pieces you looked at?
Yes, I would love to. If I have an interest in the political communication, so, and that's why I've been mentioning in the end that it would be very interesting to look at not only at the Associated Press, but at, for example, we see how the partisanship rises among the media outlets. So It would be very interesting to look at, for example, a New York Times coverage and the Wall Street Journal coverage, or the Wall Street Journal opinion coverage and the New York Times opinion coverages, because again, as the polarization rises, the partisanship of the certain media outlets also rises, and that's, yeah, I think I would be interested in expanding my research. And again, if we talk about the biases, the numbers will be completely different, again, in terms of the partisan media, but it would be beneficial in terms of the political communication and the campaign communication that can be planned based on those numbers.
Another observation here. Dr. Cowden asks or states that she's curious how the data would have appeared in a different set of candidates, either past or future. And I was thinking similarly, you know, a study like this in Georgia, for example, for any election or any European country or any other country for that matter, just hypothetically throwing that out there.
I don't know. That's a very difficult question.
Sure.
But for example, again, it brings me to the issue, we've taken the Associated Press in the class, for example, of the political comms, I think as an example of the media outlet that covers issues, that is not throwing itself into partisanship or something, I don't know. So with this said, I think that the data would appear differently in any election, I think. And even if I take my country, for example, as an example, as a template, let's say, Georgia, again, we have their problem with the partisanship. And if we take the outlet that is objective, that is trustful, and that has proved its, let's say, its coverage of the factual information over the time, again, it will be different in any case. So I'm not sure, but I'm really interested in looking at other outlets and maybe seeing these different in numbers, difference of numbers.
A similar question in some ways, but Dr. Hunt asks again, do you think that your results would have varied significantly if your target had been regional political campaigns, such as that for a governor or a senator or a representative?
Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance yet. It's been my only second year in the US to look particularly in those campaigns. But I think, yes, it will also, it will again vary depending on the, it also depends on the what is the coverage of the regional media outlets. And if we are looking at those regional media outlets, then I think it will vary again.
Fantastic.
Very difficult questions.
Great answers. Great presentation. Well, I want to thank you again, Mariam, as well as Erina and Esra, for 3 really fantastic presentations that serve to illustrate so well the remarkable things that our graduate students are doing and reflect so well upon the instructors in their graduate programs. I cannot thank you enough. And I also want to thank Dr. Neal again for her presentation, which was also remarkable. And, you know, I do think it just, you know, goes to show, you know, how much room we have all to improve and how much we can accomplish when we do the right thing and see things in a clearer way with eyes open. So this has been a wonderful colloquium. I cannot have imagined in my wildest dreams 4 better presentations. I'm just really thrilled by it. This has been an amazing afternoon, and I cannot thank the 4 of you enough. And I want to thank also those of you in the audience who've been with us. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. And I hope that many of you will be with us again next year, and that next year when we meet, we'll be able to do so in person. So thank you so much. And if there are no further questions for any of our speakers, I think we'll conclude the 2021 Graduate Student Colloquium. Thank you so much to everyone again.